It is the agenda for the 21st century you're living in today. For a brave new world where everything that you cherished and held true will no longer exist.
In central Chile, where the only sounds are the wind and the birds, geoscientists are looking for signs that could interrupt the area's peaceful atmosphere. And here in Laguna del Maule, they believe they've found those signs in a volcanic field that has risen an unprecedented 6.5 feet since 2007. Bradley Singer is leading a team of researchers here. They're studying rhyolite, an explosive type of magma with high concentrations of gases, water, and carbon dioxide. This abundance of rhyolite has prompted Chile and Argentina to closely monitor the Andes volcanic chain. Any eruption could have the potential to devastate nearby hydroelectric projects. It could also pump out ash that could wipe out crops across Argentina and severely disrupt global air traffic.
Cyclone Varda tearing into the Indian coast on Tuesday, killing at least 4 people and forcing tens of thousands to evacuate. Heavy rain and winds hitting nearly 90 miles an hour, uprooting trees, pulling down power lines, even flipping an oil truck. Flights at Chennai Airport are canceled and trains are suspended. Schools and colleges are closed and officials are urging people not to venture outside. But in severely storm-struck areas, tens of thousands have been huddling in safe centers to wait out the worst of it. Forecasters expect the storm to ease up in the next day or so, but the Navy says it's on standby to help move people and deliver aid if Varda takes a turn for the worse.
Another massive winter storm packing snow, strong winds, and could impact a large portion of the country this week. This after a winter storm system dumped heavy snow from the Midwest to the Northeast. Some places were measuring snowfall in feet, not inches, but as many are still digging out, another Arctic blast is dipping down from Canada, bringing dangerously cold temperatures.
Pretty typical feel in the Northeast today with temperatures around average, but let's head west and more specifically northwest. That's our source region where our next batch of air is coming in. As you can see, it's a very cold batch. Packer fans are crabby because it's only 16. Vikings fans are furious. It's 6 right now. And if you factor in a strong wind, here's what it feels like if you forgot your gloves or your hat in the upper Midwest. Definitely a below zero feel factor where it feels like 23 below in the Fargo area. Wind chill advisory in effect overnight in that area. Now this cold air is going to be coming our way. You can see the low pressure center will be heading over the Hudson Bay, taking that cold air over the upper Midwest and dragging it toward the East Coast.
Scientists have learned that the brightest supernova ever observed wasn't an exploding star at all. Instead, the star was ripped apart by a giant black hole. How big of a black hole? Up to 3 billion times more massive than the sun. Scientists say the hole's gravitational pull, quote, spaghettified the star, stretching it until it was pulled apart. That's called a tidal disruption. When scientists first discovered the event, they said it was twice as bright as any supernova ever seen. But after months of further study, they found clues that it likely wasn't a supernova. First was the red backdrop. Large reddish galaxies usually aren't where you find the kind of stars needed for the brightest supernovas. Another clue? It happened at the center of the galaxy, where supermassive black holes usually reside. The final tip was heat. Instead of cooling down over time like a supernova normally would, the area got hot again and stayed warm for months. Even if it wasn't the most brilliant supernova ever, the event is still rare.
Laboratory staff hunting for the leading killer in Nigeria, the Plasmodium parasite which causes malaria. The disease is responsible for more than 40% of infant deaths and 20% of Nigerian mothers. Experts say recent advances in rapid diagnostics testing have increased the chances of survival.
The advantage of this test is you don't need a microscope, you don't need a trained microscopist, and also you don't need electricity. It's going to reduce the expenses.
Access to reliable testing rose by 22% in sub-Saharan Africa over the past 5 years. But the region accounts for 90% of malaria infections and 92% of recorded deaths last year. Hospitals and pharmacies in the ancient city of Kano were overloaded in October when a malaria epidemic broke out. Hundreds died across Nigeria. It's been 2 months since the disease claimed the lives of Shehu Aliu's children.
I lost my 2 children in the space of 1 week. They all came down with fever. We had blood tests and drugs, but they didn't help.
It's easy for mosquitoes that transmit malaria to find breeding ground in many communities.
At the heart of the high rate of mortality are issues of poor infrastructure, hygiene, and poverty. It's common to see blocked drains and pools of water like this around residential areas. Poor funding of clinics by government and inadequate treated bed nets are also partly responsible.
A campaign to protect more than 25 million under 5-year-olds using a combination of drugs was launched in the Sahel region 8 months ago. But a shortage of government funds has limited coverage to less than 1 million children. Improved access to good diagnosis and protection has helped some, but until infrastructure, funding and personal hygiene improve, millions of sub-Saharan Africans remain exposed to the continent's biggest killer.
A student at Orange Coast College in California recorded psychology professor Olga Perez Stable-Cox, she teaches a class on human sexuality, calling Trump's election an act of terrorism during a lecture. Listen.
Our nation is divided. We have been assaulted. It's an act of terrorism. One of the most frightening things for me and most people in my life is that the people committing the assault are among us.
Well, President-elect Trump said yesterday and today again that you have to catch these hackers in the act. And actually, he may not be aware, he may not have been briefed that our firm CrowdStrike actually did catch them in the act. When the DNC hired us back in May, we actually came in and deployed our technology called Falcon on all the systems inside the corporate network. We actually watched these adversaries for a number of days and weeks as we were preparing to kick them out.
Who were these adversaries? Who were these people that were actually doing the hacking of the DNC?
There were 2 groups, 2 independently working groups that we associate with Russian intelligence agencies.
The unabashed libertarian Ron Paul minces no word, saying this is an assault on the First Amendment. He says this is a form of censorship and that the government is seeking to become gatekeepers to alternate voices. Now, to be clear, it's not that Dr. Paul is saying that these fake news sources are reliable, nor is he remotely saying there's any shred of credibility to them. What Dr. Paul is saying is that these fake news stories are nothing more than typical internet hoaxes that are easily disproved, and that the onus is on the reader to verify credibility, that it's not the place of the government to tell people what they can or cannot read, or further, what they can or cannot believe. Now, Dr. Paul went on to say that the danger of this tacit censorship puts access power in the hands of few tasked with curating what people may read or see online. He seems to be drawing a direct link from that to government control over censoring anything the political establishment finds displeasing, and citing that when the fake news was on the proverbial other foot, it led to the Iraq War and the destabilizing of the entire Middle East. But Dr. Paul cautions that this is quickly becoming a slippery slope. He said this, quote, "The war on fake news has taken a chilling turn with efforts to label news and opinion sites of alternative news sources as peddlers of Russian propaganda. The main targets are critics of U.S. interventionist foreign policy, proponents of a gold standard, critics of the U.S. government's skyrocketing debt, and even those working to end police militarization. Now, all have been smeared as anti-American agents of Russia." Now, the takeaway from Ron Paul's statements today, Ed, would simply be that freedom of speech is freedom of speech, but buyer beware.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin, meine Damen und Herren! Der Worte sind genug gewechselt. Lasst uns nun endlich Taten sehen. Der größte Teil unserer Bevölkerung wünscht sich eine vollständige Verbannung der Burka als eines der bedeutendsten Symbole des politischen Islams aus der Öffentlichkeit. Dem wollen wir Rechnung tragen. Einer Tabelle der Fachhochschule Münster entnahm ich aktuelle Zahlen zur Bevölkerungsentwicklung. Danach liegt der Anteil von Menschen mit Migrationshintergrund in vielen westdeutschen Großstädten heute bei den unter 6-Jährigen bereits zwischen 55% und 70%. Ich wiederhole, 55 bis 70% der unter 6-Jährigen sind in westdeutschen Großstädten ausländischer Herkunft. Diese Zahlen belegen ganz deutlich, dass der Bevölkerungsaustausch oder die Verdrängung der deutschen Bevölkerung keine Stammtisch-Verschwörungstheorie, sondern Realität ist. Eine Realität, vor der ein großer Teil von Ihnen die Augen verschließt und damit diese Entwicklung billigend in Kauf nimmt. Und diese Zahlen machen deutlich, warum wir jetzt klare Grenzen ziehen und aufzeigen müssen, was in diesem Land geht und was nicht. Bei den grün-schwarzen Einbürgerungsbestrebungen sollen bald Menschen aus aller Herren Länder die politische Ausrichtung in diesem Land mitbestimmen, denn sie betrachten die illegalen Einwanderer bereits als Neubürger. Die Bevölkerung deutscher Abstammung wird in vielen Gebieten in naher Zukunft schon in der Minderheit sein. Wer dann noch behauptet, dass es sich lediglich um eine gefühlte Überfremdung handelt, leidet an erheblichen Realitätsverlust. Die Burka wird dann auch längst keine Ausnahme mehr darstellen. Während wir da draußen jeden Tag ein Stück unserer Heimat verlieren, denn Heimat bedeutet vor allem gewohnte Lebensnormen und Traditionen und nehmen in Kauf, dass sich Fehlentwicklungen ergeben, die sich vielleicht nie mehr korrigieren lassen und die Sie in vollem Bewusstsein und Kenntnis der Tatsachen immer weiter vorantreiben. Zum Glück merken das immer mehr Menschen in diesem Land. Davon bin ich überzeugt. Denken Sie doch bitte alle einmal nicht nur bis zur nächsten Wahl, sondern an die Zukunft unserer Kinder und Enkel. Zuallererst haben Sie diesen gegenüber eine Verantwortung und das nicht nur als Politiker, sondern vor allem als Mütter und Väter. Wir lehnen Ihren Gesetzesentwurf ab, weil er nicht einmal einen Minimalkonsens darstellt und den Wunsch der Bevölkerung ignoriert. Wir werden zu Ihrem weiteren Antrag einen Änderungsantrag einbringen. Vielleicht hören wir dann ja auch mal eine der Frauen der anderen Fraktionen zu diesem Thema. Das würde mich sehr freuen. Vielen Dank.
An artillery barrage. Heavily camouflaged commandos parachute in, storm the compound, take positions around columns as the building burns. These are North Korean special forces conducting an attack drill. Their target, a mock-up of South Korea's Blue House, their version of the White House.
I think this should be a wake-up call to the South Korean government and the South Korean people that you have a North Korea which is still bent on the potential destruction of the South.
The troops practice capturing an enemy who the North Korean anchor says needs to be put on trial. This drill, according to North Korean media, was personally directed by the country's barbarous young dictator Kim Jong-un. Experts say Kim's forces have good intelligence on the layout of the South Korean leader's residence. the North Koreans have staged an actual attack on the Blue House. January 1968, more than 24 North Korean commandos infiltrated the South. Armed with these weapons, dressed in South Korean uniforms, they got to within about 350 feet of the Blue House. In a furious gun battle, at least 30 South Koreans were killed, as well as 29 North Korean commandos. One North Korean attacker who was captured later spoke to CNN.
I came from North Korea to kill President Park Chung-hee.
It was a mission that failed, and that South Korean leader's daughter, Park Geun-hye, is the country's current president. But she's just been impeached in a massive political scandal, has had her power taken away. Experts say Kim Jong-un will use the South Korean crisis, the political instability, to his advantage. It appears tonight Kim Jong-un's already on the president-elect's radar. Donald Trump telling Fox News he needs more help in pressuring Pyongyang.
You have North Korea, you have nuclear weapons, and China could solve that problem, and they're not helping us at all.
3 days of terror. A wave of deadly terrorist attacks were unleashed across the globe. Nearly 200 people have been killed in 5 countries from Friday through this weekend. In Egypt, a suicide bomber blew himself up at a Christian church in Cairo, killing at least 23 people. No organization has claimed responsibility for that horrific act. In Mogadishu, Somalia, a car bomb killed 50 people at a port. The Islamist terrorist group Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility. While there are reports of 2 people being killed in a suicide bombing attack in Nigeria Sunday that bears the hallmarks of the Islamist terror group Boko Haram. This is 2 days after a similar Boko Haram attack in Nigeria that left 31 people dead. ISIS claimed responsibility for attacking a military base in Yemen, killing 48. And twin bomb blasts rattled the city of Istanbul, killing more than 40 people.
Authorities in Turkey, Egypt, and Somalia are looking for more suspects in the trio of terrorist attacks over the weekend, and there are mounting concerns tonight that the violence could be coming our way.
From a flourishing economic capital and home to more than 2 million Syrians, to a war zone, death and destruction. In 5 years, Aleppo City has been torn apart by fighting between government forces, opposition supporters, and various rebel groups.
And turning our attention now to Syria. In Aleppo, a military source has said government forces and their allies have taken full control over the districts abandoned by the rebels during their retreat in the city. Rebel defenses collapsed on Monday, leading to a broad army advance across more than half of the remaining rebel-held territory. It will constitute the biggest battlefield victory yet for President Bashar al-Assad and his military coalition made up of Syrian troops, Iran, the Russian Air Force, and various Shiite militias.
They say that a truce is being worked out with the Syrian government. Again, this comes as the United Nations says that more than 80 civilians were killed recently. Some reports say that people, in fact, are being executed in plain sight on the street. Civilians caught in the violence, meanwhile, are collectively pleading for help.
We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. To those who can hear me, I say, Do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite.
And in time of domestic crisis, men of goodwill and generosity should be able to unite regardless of party or politics.